Well, Richard, thanks for having me on. I'm going to take all of that as a compliment. My kids say I'm pretty boring. So whenever I get any type of compliments, I just have to soak them in. So yeah, so we own a global sales training company. We're headquartered out of Sydney, Australia, with our USA headquarters here in Scottsdale, Arizona. I actually am in my house today because in our office space, starting yesterday, they started jackhammering the sidewalks right below. And so I figured that you might not be able to hear me that well with the jackhammers going. So I'm here in the home office today. So we started our firm about 3 years ago. A lot of learning mistakes, learning curves. The last year has been really good for us. I think we made the Inc. 5000 fastest growing companies in the United States. The top 5,000 were ranked like 1,230 something. And we're
Wow, that's great. Congratulations.
Every squirrel eventually finds a nut, right? Every blind squirrel eventually finds a nut, as the saying goes. But we're ranked the number one fastest sales training company or firm in the world now in the last 12 months. So it's just about building the right team. It's not me. It's just the team around me that makes it all good. I'm just kind of the boring guy that does a lot of the methodology and stuff like that. But once you have the right team, really anything is possible in business, in my thoughts, for sure.
So you gave us some questions we could ask you, which is awesome. Thank you. And I feel like this one is really important for listeners. So what do you think are a few of the biggest mistakes entrepreneurs make when they're trying to sell their products?
I'm going to say something that everybody's going to be like, what? No way. Like, I need to be this. But I think one of the biggest mistakes, and we see companies do this, whether they're, we have a few Fortune 500 companies down to SMB to individual salespeople selling anything. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that entrepreneurs make, especially when they start, is they come across so enthusiastic about their products and services, and they try to talk about their solutions so early in conversations that they just trigger people to run the other way. Right? Think used car salesperson. Now, no pun intended, we train a lot of car dealerships, but they know what I'm talking about, okay? And I know, like, when I say that, when I'm at events and I say that, and they're like, no, like, we have to be excited about what we sell. We have to be enthusiastic, because when we're enthusiastic, people are just going to be excited too. And I'm like, really? That's so interesting. I'm thinking like that. Really? So you go into Best Buy, and the Best Buy salesperson's really excited about that flat screen TV. And you're like, wow, that's so awesome, because you're so excited. So now, do I mean that you shouldn't be excited about your products and services? No, but you have to keep that to yourself. You have to keep that internal. You have to, like when we're training groups of salespeople, we say, hey, you got to get rid of the commission breath. Like, hashtag ditch the pitch. And I think, my background is in behavioral science and human behavior. That's what I went to school for. I'm not sure that means anything, but in this, it does. So typically, like, the way the human mind works is usually within about 7 to 12 seconds of every sales call or any sales interaction you're with a prospect, whether that's on Zoom or, whether that's on the doors or whether that's in a boardroom meeting or a home, it doesn't really matter. Your prospects are subconsciously picking up on your verbal and nonverbal cues, tonality, body language, okay, what you are saying and or asking that triggers their brain to react to you in one of two ways, okay? So first way is if you come across like aggressive, if you come across needy, and I would say attached, like the commission breath is coming out, and you don't know the right questions to ask to get them to engage, it triggers what we call fight or flight mode. Okay, everybody's heard of fight or flight mode. I don't think a lot of people understand what that means. And that's where your prospects try to get rid of you very fast. And they say things like, oh, can you call me back later? I'm too busy. Or, we don't need that. We already have that. Or we don't have the money for that. Or, maybe call me back in a week, a month, a year later. Does that ever happen to anybody listening? Of course, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you come across more neutral, calm, and detached is the key word, and you ask the right questions, it triggers their brain to subconsciously become curious enough that they want to engage. that they actually want to open up to you because you might have something very important for them. So we have to, in any kind of a conversation we're in, especially as a business owner, let's say we're meeting with investors or anything, we have to come across, detached from the expectations of really making the sale, and instead focus on whether there's even a sale to be made in the first place. Focus on whether or not you can actually solve their problems.
Yeah, I mean, I would add, and so when clients call Gearhart Law and I talk to them, I usually just say, "Hey, I'm Richard Gearhart. How can I help you?" And I listen to what they have to say, and then based on what they say, I give them advice.
Yeah,
and usually the thing that I think makes it successful for us is that if you can solve their problem or show them or tell them how to solve their problem, then they're much more likely to work with you. And as opposed to saying, well, we've been in business 15 years and we have this expertise. They don't care about that. They just
nobody cares about you. They only care about.
Yeah, it's like, so, and I have a very laid back personality, but the firm has a lot of clients, and part of it is just really being able to listen to somebody and figure out a way to make your needs mesh. Or, we need clients, they need.
Yeah, we call that becoming a problem finder and problem solver, not a product pusher. And there's a whole thing we could talk about that for sure. But you're so true. It's about disarming the prospect throughout the whole sales conversation. It's all about disarming the prospect where they want to open up to you, because if you can't disarm them, they just stay like surface level with you about what's really going on. And then there's no urgency for them to make a decision at the end of that first call or second conversation. Or maybe if you're, selling medical device and it's a doctor 3 months later, they just don't move because they don't feel any urgency, because you've never been able to open them up because your questions are too surface level. And human beings, we always hear this, do they make decisions on logic or emotion? It's 100% emotion. They just justify it later with logic. You're so true. So it's about disarming the prospect.
Well, so I have another question from your list. This is awesome.
This is true authenticity here. I do pretend to be smart, but really it's not.
I do like three to five podcasts a week. And so we just came up with like the questions that seems like the audience liked the most. And we're like, you're just ask these questions.
Well, good. So I'm really interested in this because sales have been happening since before even humans existed, right? Like the dawn of time, right? But so you have a new unique methodology though that the world apparently hasn't seen before, called NEPQ. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, so my I know it sounds kind of nerdy, right? So my background is in behavioral science and human psychology. That's what I went to college for. Now I actually dropped out 13 credits short of my degree. Just going to tell everybody, right? I just got bored, right? I already had my corporate career. I was out selling. I'm like, what do I need to go to college algebra for? So I just dropped out. That's my background. So according to behavioral science, there are actually, and I'll try to make this real quick. There's actually 3 forms of communication. Okay, so there's 3 ways to communicate. And for the listeners out there, I'd suggest you write these down because you don't know what you don't know, right?
So let me guess, there's whispering, normal talking, and yelling.
Yes. So,
stop it.
Yeah, exactly. I like that. So yelling works great. So once you understand really the differences in persuasion and kind of where you're at now, let's say if you're a business owner and you're running sales teams and you kind of start to analyze what your salespeople are doing, or you're an executive and you're like, here's what I'm doing wrong. Once you understand where you are compared to where you can be, it just will change everything for you in your business. So the first mode of selling, and I'll recap this real quick, we call that ERA, E-R-A, one type of sales. That's more like boiler room selling, like Wolf on Wall Street type of selling, but we're actually the least persuasive. This is crazy when you think about it. We're the least persuasive when we tell people things like, here's your problem. Like if we just tell them their problem, or we attempt to dominate them or posture them or manipulate them or push them into doing something we want to do, right? If you guys ever watched that movie, Wolf on Wall Street, I'm sure Jordan's a great guy, but that's how they portray him and his salespeople. Like, hey, I've got a great opportunity for you. And they talk about the features and benefits and then how they have the greatest this and the greatest that, which by the way, every salesperson says they have the best product or service, right? How many of you have had a salesperson come up to you and try to sell you something and say, yeah, we're just the fifth best product. See, everybody says it.
1 out of 5 ain't, I mean, the top 5 ain't bad, I guess,
so
right?
Everybody says that we're the best. So when we say things like that, it actually triggers your prospect to actually trust you less because they're used to every salesperson saying the same thing. So they just view you like everybody else. They just commoditize you and put you off in the corner. Okay. So the first mode of selling, presenting. We've all been taught we have to have a great presentation, the 50-page slide decks, the 2-hour presentations, like you said, Richard. Here's our corporate office. We have an AA rating at the Better Business Bureau. We have the best customer service. We have the best. It's like in one ear out the other because nobody cares, right? How about telling your story? Well, I hate to tell you, but nobody cares about your story if you're selling one-to-one. Whose story do they care about? Their story. What about giving a sales pitch? We all been taught, like, hey, you got to give a great pitch. Like, I hate that word. Like, our clients, we actually mail them out t-shirts that say #ditch the pitch. Like, you got to stop pitching, right? Like, today's consumer doesn't want to be pitched at. They want to be asked, heard, and understood. If you look at Shark Tank, if anybody watch Shark Tank, the budding entrepreneurs walk on stage, and Mark Cuban and Damon John and Barbara, and they're all sitting there and they go into their pitch. Have you ever watched the shark's body language? They're like, oh my gosh, like, they just like look at them like, what are you doing? Right? You got to ditch the pitch. And what about putting sales pressure on them? How many people do that? So that's the first mode of selling. Now, the second form of selling is what's called consultative selling. Okay. That came out in the 80s, early 90s with a book called Spin Selling by a professor that actually monitored all these calls. It's actually a really good book for that time, but it talked about we need to ask questions to find out the needs of the client. What a remarkable idea. We have to ask questions to find out their needs. Okay?
That came from a professor who studied it. Wow.
Well, he did like thousands of recordings of sales calls and monitoring. It was a really good, it was groundbreaking in like 1986. But the problem is it's 2021. And things have changed. The buyers have drastically changed their buying habits. Social media, the power of the internet, completely different era, okay? So what's the downfall of just asking logical-based questions, though? When you only ask logical-based questions, surface-level questions, your prospects do what? They give you logical-based answers in return. And we just talked about that. Do people buy on logic or emotion? Well, brain studies show it's 100% emotion. So once again, it's more persuasive than the first way of boiler room selling, but you're still playing the numbers game because very little emotion is brought up by asking questions that, Richard, what's keeping you awake at night? Or can you tell me two problems can you tell me 2 problems you have? Like, those are just surface level questions. Like, people don't feel urgency by surface level questions that 10,000 salespeople have asked them before that. Now, the third mode of communication, we call that dialogue. Now we're getting into the nitty-gritty. We call that dialogue when we ask what are called, the brain term there, neuro-emotional persuasion questions. That stands for NEPQ. This is the key. We're using certain questions and techniques that work with human behavior rather than work against it. That's the key. Work with human behavior to get the prospect to want to pull us in rather than us try to push our way in. So that's the $1 million question. How do you do that? Well, there's specific skilled questions you have to learn in a step-by-step structure that gets your prospect to sell and persuade themselves. That's what.
So give us an example of one of those questions.
Oh gosh, we could have 1,000. In what circumstance? Give me a circumstance. Let's say I'll give you one. Maybe that'll help. Let's say that you need to build urgency in the sale. Okay. And you could ask a question like this. We call these consequence questions. Okay. Consequence questions allow the prospect to question their way of thinking that's allowed the problem to still happen. So I'll give you an industry specific example. That'll be better. Let's say if you sell, leads to companies, like you have a lead generation company, marketing company, and you sell like higher qualified leads to any type of business. Let's just say that. So towards the end of that call, I might say, but John, what if you don't do anything about this though? And you keep getting these lower quality leads over to your salespeople, and your sales keep stagnating, like you mentioned, the next 3, 6, or even 12 months from now. See, that's a consequence question. It allows them to see like, oh my gosh, what if I don't do anything about this? Or what, okay, but what are the possible ramifications if your company doesn't do anything about getting these better leads? Or what are the possible ramifications if you guys don't do anything about this? See, that gets them to question their way of thinking. That allows the problem to keep happening. When they question their way of thinking, it opens them up to be like, I have to do something, right? Because we're starting here, and we'll get into the nitty gritty if we ever have time, but we're finding out what their current situation is. We call that the current state. We're finding out what their future, what they want the future to be. We call that their objective state. Current state, objective state. Now, what's the gap in between? All of these problems that, if you learn the right questions, allow them to see they have, that they didn't really realize they had when they first started talking to you. But well, here's what we always have to know. I always love when entrepreneurs are like, wow, I never even thought about that. When you first start talking to your prospects, or they see any of your ads, most of your prospects don't even know they have a problem. They don't even know they have a problem, okay? Or maybe they do know they have a problem. Okay, let's say the Go Sleeves guys, right, with your sleeves. Maybe they're an athlete and like, man, my joints hurt, but they don't really know how bad the problem is when they first start talking to you or see your marketing, okay? Or maybe they don't understand the consequences of what will happen if they don't do anything about solving the problem. Now, through your questioning, if you learn the right skills, not only you're able to help them find that they have one problem, not by telling them, because remember, if we tell them, what does it do? In one ear, out the other, because it's coming from you, the salesperson, you're biased. But if we ask the right questions, it allows them to see that not only do they have that one problem, but now you've helped them find that they have 2 or 3 or 4 other problems at the same time. And when you're able to help your prospect to see how many problems they have and how big the gap is from where they are compared to where they want to be, it's like a layup. They're just in.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's amazing. It's and I think that's valuable.
Not that cool.
If it's valuable, because if those problems are real potential problems, then you're helping them find a solution. So
yeah, I mean, we could, I would love to ask you all the questions on this list, but that would be like a 3-hour show.
I know. I go off. I'm sorry. I just go off.
No, I'm really enjoying, this is great for our listeners, great for us, but you also have a book, The New Model of Selling to an Unsellable Generation, which people should check out. And they can find you at, where can people find you? Because you actually coach people, right?
Yeah, I mean, we train, like I said, we train Fortune 500 companies to SMB all the way down to individual sales. Our clients we train hundreds of different industries at this point. Anything that's sold, a product or service, it doesn't matter. So the book, just so you know, the book is published late spring 2022. So you can't find it yet. It's co-authored by a good friend of mine, Jerry Acuff, who's the CEO of Delta Point. It's a huge sales consulting firm as well. So we're writing that together. It's great. And then if they want to know more details about our training or anything like that, you can send them to, we have a free Facebook group. They would just go to www.salesrevolution.group. So they just go to salesrevolution.group, join that for free. We ask them a couple survey questions like what industry are they in? What do they sell? It kind of helps us know what type of training. And me, our CEO, our vice president, we have tons of our trainers that go live in there every day, and we give them different tips, different tactics. We do Q&As just to help them sell more of their products and services. So salesrevolution.group would be a good place.
Well, you sold me, that's for sure. I was
going to say, I didn't know I needed to join this group, but now I understand.
Maybe you don't. I don't know.
So a lot of good information and content there. So thank you very much, Jeremy. And we have to take a break right now, but we'll be back with more Passage to Profit right after this.